From the studios of Cheshire TV in Keene, New Hampshire, it's The Men's Room, a show by men, about men, and for everyone. Sponsored by the Monadnock Men's Resource Center and hosted by Damien Licata and Forrest Seymour.
Hello everyone, welcome back to The Men's Room. I'm Damien Licata, this is Forrest Seymour. We are co-directors of the Monadnock Men's Resource Center, which is the organization that brings you this program. Forrest also is, by the way, a therapist in private practice.
It's true. It's true. It's true.
Isn't that right?
That's right. It's
Okay.
true. It's true. We're having fun with that. The Monadnock Men's Resource Center, besides sponsoring this show, also sponsors a drop-in support group for men every Sunday night at 25 Roxbury Street in Keene, and we'll talk more about that at the end of the show. And also the URL for our website, I think, will pop up from time to time during the show, and you can get more information there.
That's right. And we want to thank everybody who's been tuning into our program on YouTube.
Yep.
Where it shows several times a week. You can go to the Cheshire TV website and find out what the exact schedule is.
Right.
It's at different times of day.
Right. On Cheshire TV is a schedule for the cable, local cable, and then
That's
on
right.
YouTube, you can get to the YouTube where you can watch any of our past episodes through going through our website again. So
That's right. And we're on Channel 8.
we are. Well, they would know that because they're probably watching
If you're
Channel 8
watching
right now.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about something here that I came across.
Okay.
And this is, we've been talking about wanting to get a teacher, an elementary school
Yes.
teacher on the program.
They seem
male.
they're busy this time of year.
Well,
I don't
for
know.
some reason, I don't know what they're doing, but apparently they have a little bit to do this time of year.
Yeah.
So we have been, working to get
Yeah.
someone in and still hope to.
Yeah.
But, in that context, I came across this interesting article here this is in the Oregonian, which is obviously an Oregon newspaper. And it talks about how much of a shortage there actually is, which, we're certainly aware of in looking for a teacher to come on the show, of male teachers, particularly at the elementary school level.
Right.
And it makes some interesting points about why that is.
Yeah.
And you saw this article too, right?
I did. I thought it was pretty fascinating. I mean, they one of the things that jumped out at me. I mean, it's sort of the salary thing is something a lot of people talk about. That men don't want to go on a career there where the salaries aren't real high. But in fact, I think that they went on to say that a lot of men don't talk about the money as being the issue, that it's more has to do with the sort of sense of masculinity. Like one point that a guy they interviewed here made that I thought was really interesting was that it was uncomfortable to be on vacation during school vacations when other men are working, which was interesting.
It is interesting because
subtle, but
and it somehow makes them feel like they should be out working. That's saying something about them.
And I have to admit, because I work on a calendar. Part of one job I have is on a school calendar.
Academic school,
and I could relate to that. I could relate to that. Sometimes when I go out during the day, I sort of wonder if my neighbors are looking at me and wondering what's he doing home.
Right. Does this guy have a job?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
What's wrong with him?
And but it's interesting because I think that there's in occupations that are dominated primarily by women, there is a salary disparity usually, and which says something about how we value women in the workplace, and where this is certainly true in the field of psychology too. I think that a lot more and more the field is being dominated by women.
Right.
Women
I was just
go
talking
into that field.
I was just talking to somebody who'd been in the administrative level in a counseling center for 30 years, and he talked about how 30 years ago it was mostly men on the staff, and now it's mostly women, and that salaries have
reflected that.
Yes.
Yep, they've gone down correspondingly. Right, which is an interesting phenomenon. Yeah. But it is so important, isn't it, that men be in the classroom with these kids. The necessity to see a male in that role, the mentoring and role model that they provide is so important.
Right. Yeah.
And if you imagine a young boy in the classroom never sees a male teacher at that level, why would he think about it for himself? Why would he think, gee, I could do this. I could be like him.
And doesn't very often see men and women working together as colleagues, and like resolving
Right.
whatever professional issues are coming
Right.
up, or
On an
teaming up
equal
on some
basis.
program or something. Yeah,
That's right.
Yeah, that is because the men tend to be the principals, right?
Right. That's true. More in the administrative role than in the classroom. And yep, absolutely.
I want to say real quick, there's another thing in this article that was touched on that I thought was fascinating. A researcher in Washington mentioned this idea of there being regional views on gender roles. Like there's
Some regional differences.
it's regional differences, which is a fascinating thought. I actually emailed with the researcher. She couldn't cite any research around that, which I thought would have been interesting to bring here. But just the notion, I think it's sort of commonsensical, but on the other hand, it's something I hadn't thought about very much. It's like they were saying that in different regions, they suggested in the South that that men are more likely to identify their career as having really tied in with their masculinity.
Right. Whereas in areas like where this article was written in Oregon,
Pacific Northwest.
right, there are other. They say that there are other ways in which men can express their masculinity.
Wearing hiking boots.
Yeah, the other sorts of macho activities that they can engage in. That and doesn't necessarily have to be all invested in their work.
Right.
So it certainly is an interesting idea, and they did say that schools generally don't seem to aggressively recruit men. They're not as concerned about diversity of gender as they are, for example, with race, particularly if they're in a diverse neighborhood.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting phenomenon. A lot of people are talking about the importance of men in the classroom, appreciating the value of men in the classroom. But there's not a lot of aggressive.
They're not ready for that yet.
No.
Well, maybe they'll get there. Maybe we'll all get there.
Let's hope so. Yep.
So I want to move on to our guest because I'm really excited about our
Absolutely.
guest today.
Yeah, me too.
And our guest today is Sam Osherson. He's lives near us here in Nelson, active member of the community there. He's also a professor of psychology at the Fielding Graduate University and director of the Alonzo Center for Psychodynamic Studies. He's faculty at the Stanley King Counseling Institute and has a private practice in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He's written several books that, for this conversation around men are really relevant. Finding Our Fathers, How a Man's Life is Shaped by the Relationship with His Father is one. The Hidden Wisdom of Parents, The Passions of Fatherhood, Wrestling with Love, How Men Struggle with Intimacy. Some great titles and good books on topics that we talk about here. And I'm really glad to welcome you to our show, Sam.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for being here.
Good to see you.
So what, you have a long history, and you do searches around men's issues on the web, and your name pops up. I mean, because in no small part because of some of the books you've written. Mm-hmm. I mean, what have you been thinking about lately, or what do you think's going on with men? What's your sort of most current thinking about?
Well, probably something new and something old. I mean, I think what's going on for men now is, in some ways, what's been going on with men for thousands of years, which is kind of touched on by the article you were mentioning about elementary school teachers. What are the opportunities for men to really explore who they are and to find new ways of being in the world that are generative, that are life-giving, that as in fact teaching in some ways, of course, is. And I think in the 21st century that's an ongoing struggle for men, as it has been. Except now I think the stakes are so high.
Why higher now than in the past?
Well, I think we're confronting a lot of cultural dilemmas, which are in our discourse in some ways. The whole issue of aggression in the world, and how to manage differences, and how to find solutions to social problems that are less violent, less in your face, less kind of one-up, if you will. And I think men are often, traditionally men have been looked to as the protectors. Mm-hmm. Men have been the ones, and we've taken that role for good reasons. And I think we have a real contribution that we can make in helping rethink what is protection, what is security, how do we live in a dangerous, scary world without losing our minds or our lives.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the things, and I'd be interested to hear what you say about this, is that we've also had this sort of traditional idea in any sort of conflict of this win-lose, that somebody needs to win, somebody needs to lose, and nobody wants to be a loser. And I think that's particularly true, I think, traditionally of men, that they don't want to be identified, they don't want to think of themselves.
The whole issue of being I think a lot about shame and aggression in men's lives. This is true in women's lives too, but being a male myself and wrestling with issues of shame and aggression in my own life and looking at this in the world, this whole question of what does it mean to lose, and what does it mean to be put in a situation where you feel like the only way to protect your sense of self-esteem is to strike back.
Exactly.
Is a really profound dilemma. You know, even in this discussion around the elementary school, the feeling of not being a real man if you're not working when everyone else is really goes right to this issue of self-esteem and shame. That somehow I'm less than, I'm not living up to what these social definitions are.
Right. Really very rigid traditional sense of what it means. Yeah.
Yes, and I think they're still very rigid.
Yeah, they're there. It's there in the Zeitgeist or something.
Yeah.
But what's the shame? How does the shame fit in there?
Well, you know, it's at those moments when you feel like I'm not really being a man, that part of the wish is to cover up and to kind of protect yourself from this feeling of being less than.
Yeah.
I mean, shame really refers to the feeling of defect. That there's something wrong at the core of myself. Right? And I think for men, that's a very profound feeling.
And when I think of shame too, I think that a piece of it is that it's sort of inexplicable. Like it doesn't quite make sense what the shame is about. And like I can't understand. I mean, we can understand if I did something wrong or I didn't, things didn't work out. But to have that sense of like I'm not living up to the expectations, and I can't live up to the expectations, but I can't explain why, And I think, and what I think about with men is that we are given this set of expectations to live up to, which is sort of inexplicable. Like how the heck can we do that?
Yeah, I think too, though, don't you, that the way that we're socialized incorporates shame as a tool very often. I think that we are conditioned very early on to we experience enough of that it becomes absolutely something we don't want to have to experience anymore.
Because of sort of humiliating things that happen when we're young.
Right.
Around our masculinity.
Around our masculinity, ways in which we're ashamed or teased or in some way, that's part of the male socialization, don't you think?
Well, I mean, I can remember many experiences in my own life, and I think most of us can, of being on the schoolyard or the playing field somewhere and feeling weak, unsure, and learning how to cover that up. Because as a guy that if you show vulnerability, if you start to cry, if you act like you don't know, you become a target real fast. So one of the first things you learn as a guy is how to kind of cover over whatever sense of inadequacy you feel.
God, it pains me to think about that.
Yeah, well, it works really well for us.
I think we've all had these.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Guy lesson number one, right? Which is don't show vulnerability.
That's right. Don't cry.
Don't
cry.
Right.
So we were talking before the show a little bit about this idea of there being sort of these critical incidents that happen in men's lives, and I'm thinking about sort of that one. I mean, that's what made me think of it, is like this message that you don't cry is sort of like that's a part of the I guess rite of passage into boyhood. But I'm wondering what else, what other sort of critical, really important events do you see in the formation of men and masculinity?
It's a good question. Yeah. And what makes them different from those kinds of events in women's lives? I mean, why are these men's incidents?
Well, we're all human. So there's men and women, boys and girls are both human. So there's a lot of overlap. And in fact, one of the most striking things about social science research, just to get academic for a second, is that most of these gender differences that we talk about, actually the within group variation is greater than the between group variation.
Yes.
So, there are a lot of guys who can feel and express a lot of emotion, and there are a lot of women who, will not express emotion at the cost of their lives. So these are very broad generalizations.
Sure.
And, but I think in men's lives, I mean, if you think about critical events, they're both negative critical events and positive ones. I mean, they're ones that cause us to kind of close off, like the moment on the playground when you cry and somebody goes, look at you, and you just dry your tears in some whatever way you can.
Yeah.
But then there are also very positive experiences, I think, in boys' lives, moments of connection. For example, one of the things that's always struck me is the stereotype of boys and men is that they're tough and that they're not interested in connection and they're more interested in achievement and all of that. But when you talk to men about their lives, men form such close and important relationships, for example, with their mothers, and with significant women, teachers in their lives. Moments of connection with dad are often treasured memories that men hold on to. I've written a lot about fathers, and I'll often ask men to write their most treasured memory, with their fathers, and they'll tell a memory. And it's almost as if they're saying, I'm giving you something really important.
Treat this with
respect.
With respect.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you know that moments when boys' sense of being a person who has a need to be attached and connected to other people is met and acknowledged.
Yeah.
That's why teachers are so important on this theme you're raising. Because teachers can convey that to boy students.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So
I think that adult men probably have experiences like this, but they're usually or often associated with, either traumatic experiences or under duress, or, for example, we often hear about men in the military having these enormously important relationships or bonding experiences with other men. I can speak my own experience, even in just basic training. That being thrown together with men for the first time from all different walks of life and all over the country, and some of these young boys never been away from home before. I remember one young man from Kentucky who would cry at night in the barracks because he'd never been away from home before, and the way in which these men would support him, it was a very different experience from, I'm sure, what he was used to.
how would they support him? How would
They would go over to him. They would talk to him. They would tell him that he's going to be okay. It's just got to get through this. Once you get through this, you'll be all right. That's sort of a kind of validating how hard it was and saying we're in this together.
Yeah.
And I think that's not a typical experience that men have, which is why I think it's often one of those sort of critical moments.
Well, it's interesting. Maybe not a typical experience, but that was a very private experience that you're talking about. I mean, it happened
That's
in a
right.
men's space, in a barracks in the military.
Right.
And there, it makes me wonder, and maybe in your work you can show some insight on this, but that I wonder if there are certain places and times where men are more, where it's more okay for men to create those connections, to show those connections between each other.
Right.
Like perhaps at night in the barracks, or I think of when men are alone.
Or being in the
with
soldier role.
Yeah.
I mean, the old joke about football, about how the whole point of football is the huddle.
Right.
Because that's the chance that you get to put your arms around another man. And
Yeah.
they'll go through all of that
Smack
pain.
him on the butt too.
Right,
if you want to.
right.
Yeah, right.
All that pain in football is worth it because you're in the huddle, right? I mean, I think if men feel like they have a chance to acknowledge that they're real men, it makes it a lot easier for us to then be tender with each other.
Yeah.
If they're in a situation where that's not questioned,
Right.
like on the football field or with that uniform on.
Right.
That's so fascinating, isn't it? It's like you got to pay your dues, and then you can be.
That's
gentle.
right. Right. That's right.
Yeah.
And and I think that goes back to some extent. It goes back to shame. Feeling like I'm a real guy, so I can be tender. I've shown the world I'm a real guy. I've proven myself.
So what about looking at men's lives, longitudinally? Do you see trends of men gaining the ability to be tender as they age? I mean, is that an arc?
Oh, yes. Oh, I think that there's a fair amount of research that indicates that as men age, they become much more concerned with what we sometimes call generativity, being generative, nurturing, being able to, my hunch is that the mentor role is a really important role for men as they age, to feel like they can, because things get so hard in families. Fathers, just to make a broad statement, I don't I haven't done careful research. My hunch is a lot of fathers often feel like they could have done better because it's such a difficult role in a family to be a dad.
Right.
And so the opportunities to mentor younger men, I think, become very important for men as they age and consolidate their.
Gives them a chance to sort of try to do some things that they maybe wish they had done when they were
Yeah, and to feel like they're of value.
Yeah.
To feel like they're of value to the younger generation. A lot of older men can't find ways to connect and to feel like they have some worth as wise men.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Wow.
So this idea of mentoring also reminds me of that father and son relationship
Yeah.
you mentioned. And fathers often, like you said, often feel like they could have done better, or that they're in the moment they feel sometimes inadequate. Oftentimes because connecting with their son can be difficult.
Yeah.
And for a lot of reasons. Do you have any thoughts about what sort of things come into play in that father-son relationship that might get in the way?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, having wrestled with my own dad and wrestled with my son, and as a son and a father, it's such a complicated. It's almost an impossible relationship because you're. I mean, as a father, your son sees you in certain ways. I mean, you're enormous as a father. I mean, physically, right?
Right.
Particularly with young children, right? But there's.
I was going to say physically enormous, and that is a heightened significance because so much of masculinity is about
Size.
physicality. And
That's
size,
right.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
right. And the boy yearns to be like you, right? And is also afraid of not being able to. I mean, how do we as little boys ever make that leap to what it's like to be a man? It just feels to me like an extraordinary mental leap. So the son is both wary of the father and worried and competes with the father, because then we have mother in the family. And you don't have to be Sigmund Freud to know. You have to be a father for about 2 minutes to know, right? That mothers fall in love with their sons, and something happens in the marital relationship when you have a kid.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
It's filled with all this romantic stuff about becoming a parent, but my hunch is most men know that the wife goes on vacation emotionally because she's got this new love.
Yeah.
And so do we.
Right.
And I think often wives feel that husbands change dramatically. So the father is competing with the son. He wants to nurture the son. He feels often inadequate himself as a father because he's drawing on his memories of his own father, and often that was a difficult relationship. I mean, how do we make up what it means to be a father? Right?
Yeah, I often say that my kids taught me how to be a father because I had no idea.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the idea I had was my own dad, who really, he did the best he could, and he was a great dad, but it was not a roadmap for me as to how to be a father.
Right.
It's not a roadmap.
Right. Yeah. I know my own father was very much like, very traditional role. He went to work, he came home. When he came home, it was all about making sure he was comfortable and not bothered by the kids.
Right.
So there was that. I'm reminded of a recent New Yorker cartoon where a gentleman goes into the office and says to his boss, "My wife is about to deliver a baby. Could we arrange for me to work late for the next 18 years?"
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a reflection of some of the sort of discomfort that a lot of men are feeling around that time, and it's like, and also this sort of sense that that they don't have a role to play.
Yes.
During that, especially that initial time. I think that's what kind of can lead some men to pull away.
Yeah.
Well, it's a complicated thing. For example, the elementary school research that you were mentioning, there has been research about trying to bring men into schools. And actually, some of the research indicates that schools will say they want more young men teachers, but in their behavior, they reveal they don't want. They don't want men entering into what has traditionally been a female. We don't. These barbarians, these guys coming in here, and I think when you have a child as a man, you pick up some of those subtle vibes.
Sure.
What's my place?
This is not your.
Right. And everybody says, "Oh, it's so
domain.
great that you're there. You're the dad."
Right.
But it's also, and why don't you sit over there?
Yeah.
Right.
It might be nice if it just felt a little more normal instead of feeling so special.
Yes, that's right.
I've heard this idea too that men feel incompetent, in that role, and that they, and that oftentimes that is, it's not out of any natural incompetence, but that they are often getting messages,
Yes.
Yeah.
from often the mothers and other people that they are not, that you can't do this and you can't do it well, and
Yes,
this
yes.
this is my job.
And there's actually some research that indicates actually looking at new parents that they're equally incompetent. Moms don't know either.
Well, that's nice. A little equality. That's what we're after,
absolutely,
right?
right. We're both muddling
Who
through
knows
this.
what they're
Who
doing
knows?
at that point? Right.
So we only have like a minute left,
Yes.
and I mean time just flies. I'm wondering, I'm just thinking about new fathers, maybe watching the show, and wondering if you have some thoughts about like advice from your in your generative role, like how you might what you might say to a new father.
Well, I first of all, I'm jealous because my kids are grown up and I miss them terribly. So, I would say to them the same thing that was said to me, which really pissed me off, which is they grow up so fast, make sure to be there. And people would say that to me and I think, what?
Right.
I'm caught in this morass of stuff,
Right. This endless morass.
Endless morass. Look to other men.
Yeah.
Look to your wife. Talk about incompetence. Talk about what it feels like you can't talk about, because that's actually where the difficulties are. And you're immensely, immensely important to your daughter and to your son. And never forget that.
That's
how
an
you
important
are.
message. Yeah.
Well,
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for coming and talking here.
A pleasure.
It's
Thank
been
you.
great having
Thanks.
you.
Thank you.
We're out of time.
Mine too.
So wow, I just feel like it's getting me thinking about all sorts of stuff.
God, I'm telling you, I always think when we start talking about, because I'm a father as well, and I always think about, where I could have done it differently as well, and how, and my own father, it's a maelstrom.
Yeah, maelstrom.
It's a maelstrom of emotions that come up.
So let's take a quick minute to talk about the drop-in support group, where
Absolutely.
men
Yep.
can bring their maelstroms to talk about.
Please do. Come maelstrom.
Every
in hand.
Sunday night at 25 Roxbury Street, 7 o'clock. It's at the back of the parking lot right next to Oberson's Hardware in
Right.
Keene.
Yep. Life Art donates that space for us. Thanks so much, Life Art. And this is the brochure that you'll see in various places around the community.
Yeah.
If you see one, pick one up. If you're curious, gives you more information about what the drop-in group is about. And we would encourage you to come just if you're curious. You can come and you don't necessarily have to say a word.
No, it's a very easy thing. You come in, sit down, other guys are there. You can, talk or not talk. And we always have it facilitated by a couple trained volunteers. It's a pretty safe and interesting time.
That's right. Yep. So thanks again, everyone, for tuning in to the Men's Room.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next week.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. You did a great
So
job.
if everything goes right, they've turned off the microphones and the credits are rolling.
Yeah.
So.